Okay, I'm Amber Healer. I am the principal investigator for the IT Skills Standards 2020 and beyond. And Christina Titus is the program director. She and I together handle most of the back office information. And there are a few people on the call also who are from the project team. I'm not going to stop and take time to introduce everybody right now. I'll go ahead and go through these slides, and I want to leave plenty of time for questions. And we welcome every one of you. We're really excited about what we've done, and we're very excited to share it with you. Christina, next slide, please. Well, first of all, why are we bothering with skill standards? They're very, very important because they're a blueprint of the knowledge and skills that high performance workplaces want and how the roles of workers contribute to the success. And I think we in education sometimes are so busy doing what we're doing that we don't take we don't have the time to actually keep up with industry if we don't actually consciously and intentionally do things like what we have done in this Skill Standards project to ensure that we have the latest information from the employers. These also make the IT careers more accessible because I know that I have had students in my classes, I don't teach anymore, but I used to, in my IT classes who signed up for IT because it was a high-paying job and they were sure they were going to be able to do it. But you know what? It's very important that the people that are in IT really love it because it is a very fast-paced career, as all of you know, and it's something that they really need to be well suited to do. We also ultimately want the business and industry to hire our students. And businesses are telling me they are not super excited about having people graduate and know how to do just a vendor or a 2 or 3 vendors. They want to know how those students to know how to integrate things across vendors to solve business problems. So that's one of the things that we focused upon in this as well. Next slide. Educators use this information to create relevant curriculum and prepare the students so that they are well suited for high-paying jobs upon graduation. And employers actually like using this sort of thing as well to improve communication with job candidates. Now, that's not so true for the very, very large employers because they have whole staffs that do this sort of thing, but especially the small and medium-sized employers who are often the largest employers of our graduates do need this sort of information. Next slide. So our purpose overall when we wrote this grant for the National Science Foundation was to widen the pipeline of qualified IT workers. There are literally millions, yes, million with an M, millions of open jobs that remain open in IT and cybersecurity because we don't have enough qualified workers. And our goal in this was to create future-facing skill standards so that we educators would have time to respond a bit and update our curriculum so that our graduates would, in fact, be well suited for these jobs. And again, it helps both the employers and the educators along the way. Just a case in point, note that the last comprehensive set of skill standards was created in 2003. This is not a small undertaking. It is huge. It was done at the Northwest Center for Emerging Technologies in Washington State, and it has not been updated as a comprehensive set of skill standards since then. So it was far time, definitely due time for us to update this information, and that's what we did. Next slide. We engage our employers as co-leaders of the work, or actually as leaders of the work in this case. We do follow the business and industry leadership team process, which we're not going to talk a whole lot about today, in fact, not much at all, other than to say that we believe very strongly that our employers need to lead with respect to what knowledge, skills, and abilities and tasks they want our graduates to be able to do. So we are using the business and industry leadership team model that is a business advisory council model on steroids that was created by the National Convergence Technology Center, and there's the URL at the bottom. And again, the employers co-lead the work, not just advise. They really, you can almost say they totally led the work with our assistance in process. Next slide. All right, what did we start with? Well, this is a massive job. And what we started with, sorry, I am not ill, but I am having allergies this time. So I will try not to clear my throat too much. We started this process with a group of about 100 thought leaders from across the United States to basically figure out what the particular job clusters of focus would be for our work. We typically started with folks that were CTOs, Chief Technology Officers, Chief Information Officers, Chief Security Officers, and other individuals that are responsible for, and I'm going to say, seeing the future. Then you'll see that I'm going to push really, really hard on the future focus of all the work that we do, because it takes us a while to modify our curriculum. If we ask them what they need today, that's all wonderful if we already have students today, but it doesn't work too well if in fact they're wanting to, if we find out today what they want and we have to make curriculum modifications. So that's why I asked the folks to focus on the future. Our goal was to identify 8 to 10 of the most critical and difficult to fill job clusters for the future. We had 4 meetings because 100 people is pretty tough to handle on Zoom. Our project team did synthesize the results, and we went out using a Delphi model via multiple surveys to come to consensus on at least 7 of the job clusters. We tried for the 8th and we just didn't get there when we first started this. And that was about 2 years ago, 2.5 years ago. So we have held a second thought leader meeting recently, and that was to identify the remaining 2 or 3 clusters. So we started from a top down with thought leaders leading the way, and boy, they had a really lively discussion in all those 4 meetings. And I think we came up with information that is very, very useful. Next slide. This is a sample job cluster definition, and I will hasten to add that this is not a job definition that is, I'm going to call it a capital R research type job definition. This is an applied job definition that the people that actually hire these students came up with, and they came up with this description over time as well. We usually started with something from someplace on the internet. It was not always, a standard, because I'm sure it's not any great surprise to you that whatever was done in 2003 is not particularly useful now, other than some of the process approach. So we worked with them to come up with these job cluster definitions. And it was kind of a broad job cluster, but we were asking them to focus on entry-level workers as well. Next slide. So we identified 7 job clusters, and the first 6 are completed. We did the entire process, and we'll show you what we have at the end of that process. And then the skill standards that are still in process that are really just about done, they'll be done within a week or so. We have a cybersecurity skill set, and we did not do the full skill standard package for cybersecurity. And that's because the NICE and NIST organizations related to NSA, National Security Association, not an agency, sorry. Those folks are funded by the government, and they're able to keep all of the cybersecurity information more up to date on a continuing basis. We are a grant, and while we do have quite a number of years that we can do this work, we will not be in business on an ongoing basis. Next slide. Now, once we had the job clusters identified, the project team, and we have a group of about 8 people, 7 people across the US, some on the East Coast, some on the West Coast, some in the center part of the nation. And we did that, by the way, because we had hoped to have all of these meetings face-to-face with the employers. Well, that kind of didn't happen. We had to convert to virtual using Zoom, pretty quickly. But our project team in all cases compiled a pro forma or a starting point of knowledge, skills, abilities, and tasks for the employers to evaluate. And we used lots of different sources. We were not into reinventing the wheel. We were using existing sources and then having the employers validate them, and then have the opportunity to add other things to the list. The employer subject matter experts voted on the items on the pro forma list using a structured and repeatable process from the built model. And then we had discussion as well. Just like a typical advisory council, we did have discussion, but I have to tell you that once we have a vote and the results of the vote from the pro forma KSAs and tasks, the discussion is very rich and very detailed. It's very useful. I would offer it's more than what you normally get from an advisory council. The employer SMEs could also decide to add or change items, and through their voting, they actually could delete items off the list if they didn't think they were going to be important 12 to 36 months into the future. And they also had a separate task that they were working on, which was identifying the appropriate employability skills, professional skills, soft skills, whatever you want to call them, the very important part of the skills that our graduates must have in order to be able to obtain and keep their jobs. Next slide. We're going to share some of this. We did start from a pro forma list. That's basically just start from a list that's already done. I have found that in working with employers, if I give them something to respond to, the meeting goes much more efficiently than it does if I say, okay, what do you think? And I have a bunch of whiteboards that we're looking at. The starting point is, again, the basis for discussion. It's our best estimate. And the pro forma knowledge and skills were, again, created for each job cluster. There's usually about 70 to 150 of knowledge and skills mostly. And then the employers voted, and they prioritized the results through their vote. And then we actually showed the results on the screen. And we're going to have a screen that shows you a little bit of that in just a minute. But I want to emphasize again that we have synchronous discussion. Next slide. This is what the results look like. When they vote, they're voting using a Google form, and we have automated the summarization of those forms into the spreadsheet. A 4 means that an item absolutely must be in the curriculum. A 3 means it should be. A 2 means it's nice to have. And a 1 means we don't need it. So the reality is that they go through a screen at a time and discuss the items. And if the items are under about a 2.6, we cause that to be something to be discussed. And then we capture comments as we go. Next slide. This is what it looks like once we publish. And we're going to show you in a minute where you find all these skill standards. But once these are published, we don't show the distribution of the votes so much anymore, but we do show the average. And so there's a whole section on tasks and knowledge and skills, and in some cases, abilities. And we'll have a live demo in a minute. Next slide. For employability skills, there are 11 of the key employability skills that we talk about. I will say that I've never worked with a business group that doesn't want all of these. The question is, how detailed do they want to be in working with all of these different items? And so with the leadership of Terrell Bailey on the West Coast and Susie Ames on the West Coast, we came up with an instrument that had statements about each of these focus areas, a level 1, a level 2, and a level 3 statement of what the employee or not employee, what the student would be able to do. And they voted, and in most cases, in fact, this slide is showing level 1 and level 2 for all of them. But depending on the job, in some cases, level 1 was enough. Level 2 actually assumes that the student can do level 1 as well. And I know I'm going really fast, but we've got a whole lot more information about this in our website that we're going to talk about. But the idea then is this gives us a guidance. Let's look, for example, at oral communication. The employer said that an employee must be able to comprehend and execute oral instructions with minimal guidance and exhibits good listening skills. The employee clarifies for meaning without needing prompting from a supervisor, as opposed to if they had only been level 1, they might have had some additional help. Next slide. After the initial job cluster meeting, the project team synthesized data across the various meetings. And in all cases, we had at least 2, sometimes as many as 4 meetings because of the number of people, the number of employers that wanted to be involved. The project team did need to synthesize the votes, which that was easy. We can add Excel sheets together rather easily. However, we needed to be able to actually capture what the discussion was. And we needed to synthesize all of that as well to figure out what needed to be added to the list. So we did do that as a team. Then we held follow-up meetings to go over with the employer subject matter experts, the ones that attended and did the prioritization. We held the meeting with them to get their blessing on the synthesis that we had done. And they also, at that time, voted on statements of key performance indicators. For example, how good is good enough in doing a particular skill? So they actually did that in follow-up meetings. Then the educator subject matter experts, we had educators involved all along in the meetings. They actually developed student learning outcomes after the second employer SME meeting. And over time, we've worked with about 250 different business subject matter experts across the United States. It's been amazing how many people have been very, very interested in being involved with us and how many have continued to work with us throughout this process. Next slide. 6 of the job clusters are complete and have been recognized by the Texas Skills Standards Board. We're pretty happy with that. Those 6 job clusters are posted and being distributed throughout the state. And now we're seeking access in other states to something similar to this so that we can get the work out and have other colleges across the United States utilize what we've done. Next slide. Each job cluster includes the tasks and KSAs with the average votes. It includes the key performance indicators for the tasks. It includes the information about employability skills. And the educators then also created the student learning outcomes. We did not have funding and do not have funding to create curriculum for everything, but we do have the ability to create the student learning outcomes, which allows colleges across the United States to be able to go ahead and utilize the information. And that's what we're going to suggest that might be one of the next steps you might want to do. Next slide. The components that are available are at itskillstandards.org. And this looks the same regardless of which cluster you're looking at. You can download the KSAs, the knowledge, skills, abilities, and tasks. You can download those in a PDF, or you can download those in an Excel spreadsheet and highlight that point, because if you do it in an Excel spreadsheet, we can help you put that into an electronic form, and you can actually use that information with your faculty or with your business team. And we'll talk more about that in a minute. Student learning outcomes are listed. You can use those directly. Key performance indicators are very useful in determining how you're going to address the particular knowledge and skills. And then the employability skills influence what sorts of projects you may want to do to help the student gain those employability skills. Next slide. By the way, you can put questions in the chat. This is the main page for IT Skill Standards. We do work with the National Convergence Technology Center, which is a national IT center under the National Science Foundation. And at this point, you can see we have the 6 clusters there. And we also have information about the professional development that we're doing. Right now, we're focusing on getting the word out with educators. And you can see today's session is there, as is another session that's going to occur on the 22nd. Next slide. So Christina, would you give us a demonstration of the website?
Absolutely. Thank you, Anne. So as Anne mentioned, when you type in itskillsstandards.org, this is the page you will see. At the top is our skill standards that are available, the first 6. We will be adding cybersecurity here shortly. Again, at a glance, you can see the upcoming meetings. If we have any future jobs cluster meetings, those will be here on the left, and our professional development will always be on the right. After you scroll down through our website, you just get a little bit of about information. We have our flow chart, which is our process that Anne just kind of shared with you generally. This just gives you a high level summarization of what she said and how we got to the skill standards that we've created. Below that is a list of companies that have participated. It is not an exclusive list or a full comprehensive list. It is just a small piece of those companies that we've worked with.
Now, Christina, you might point out that some companies are not able to give permission for us to use their name. So this is not an exclusive, an extensive list that covers everything, but we've been amazed at the amount of support that we've gotten.
Okay, so let's take a deep dive into a job cluster. So at the top of every job cluster, as Anne said, they all do look the same. You'll find again that really definition of what the job cluster is. It also goes into a little bit about, kind of how we came to it, and that this is free for anyone to access. Anyone can come out here to the website and click on it. It's all free for everyone to click on and download. It does not require a login of any sort. So you can click on KSAs here on the website, and it will take you to a new page. At the top of each of the KSA page, it explains the vote and what the vote means. It also gives you an explanation of what a task, knowledge, skill, and ability are, with a little bit of an example that kind of helps explain what does it mean for a task, a knowledge, skill, and ability. And then below you'll find just that, the task, knowledge, skills, and abilities. This is a scrollable form. But again, if you prefer, you can download a PDF or Excel right here. We can download it real quick, and you'll see it pops up as an Excel document. Ready for you to use. Student learning outcomes. Again, they all will have a little bit of an explanation at the top of what it is you're looking at. And one of the things I'll point out here, and the same thing is true with the key performance indicators, they are not a 1-for-1. So it's not going to be like one knowledge item to one student learning outcome. It can be many like knowledge areas to one student learning outcome, or many tasks to one or multiple key performance indicators. And you'll see that when we get to that page. But just these double thick lines kind of separate them out for you. So here we'll take a look at those key performance indicators, and you can again see it's not a 1-for-1 by any means. And here as an example, it's 1 to many. So that kind of just helps with explanation that it isn't 1-for-1, but it can be many to one or one to many. and the employability skills. Again, at the top, it explains how we came to it, what do the different levels mean, and then you'll find the document below. All documents are available to download, and we'll just click on one more just so you can see that they all do look alike. And there you go, they all look exactly alike, so that way it's familiar, you know what you're looking for, and it's easy to find. The last page on our website is our leadership team, and this just breaks us down by coast. We have the central, the 4 of us here in the central location. We've got our West Coast team, as well as our East Coast team.
And Christina, it's very good for them to know that they can contact any of us if they would like to help.
Absolutely. And it's back to you.
Okay, next slide. All right, what can you do with what we've done? And we went through it really fast. I know we did, but I promise you that all this information is on the website. You can go through it at your leisure. We will send you the slides or send you a link to the slides and the recording. And what can you do? If you have an existing program already, let's say you have an existing infrastructure program. And by the way, infrastructure and connectivity actually is a fancy name for networking and cloud. If you have an existing program, you might be able to you can, I won't say might, you can download the information about the knowledge, skills, abilities, and tasks, and the SLOs for sure. You can compare that or use that for comparison at a discussion at your next faculty meeting. Some changes may require new modules. Some might require just tweaks. Maybe not whole new courses, but you might need whole new courses also. You also can use the comparison information working with your next business advisory council. And we prefer the business and industry leadership team. Again, that model has caught on nationwide. It's very, very popular because it does put the employers in a leadership role. We are not focusing on that in any kind of detail here today, but we have a lot of information about the business and industry leadership team also on the same website where you're going to find the IT skills standards. And on an earlier slide, we had a connection or a URL for connectedtech.org, and that definitely has more information about the business and industry leadership team. You can also contact me. There are other grants, not this one, but there are other grants that are helping colleges nationwide to implement the business and industry leadership team model. Next slide. Now, if you have for new programs, you can start off with the KSAs and tasks and start from that to work with your businesses to validate the need in your local region. And then you can use that as a jumping off point for developing a whole new curriculum. I know that several people or several colleges across the United States have used, for example, the data analytics information that we have to create a data analytics 2-year program for their colleges in conjunction with their built teams, their business and industry teams. And when you get down to creating the curriculum, the student learning outcomes give you a jump start for creating full curriculum. Again, it's not a full course, but it does help you in terms of creating learning outcomes rapidly. Be sure to consider labor market demand, The labor market demand is always very important because we don't want to be training students for jobs that might not be in demand in the area. Next slide. All right, how about trying it yourself at least a little bit? Let's have you vote on some KSAs. We're going to give you a link. If you're able to, please feel free to go ahead and do it. You'll have to have a computing device of some kind. We will then examine the resulting votes and talk about it. And we'll talk about how faculty do cross-reference to existing curriculum, because there's almost always some existing curriculum, even if in fact you're doing a whole new program. Next slide. Here is the voting link. Can you put that in the chat
Mark has
window?
already posted it in the chat window.
Very good. It's already there. Thank you, Mark. So take that link from the chat window, just click on it, and you will see a voting form that only has maybe 5 or 6 items. I don't know, maybe 10. But go ahead and vote. And then what we're going to do is show you what the results look like. Actually, it has more than I remembered. It has about 16 items, but it still won't take you very long to vote. The point is you will see what the results look like. So take maybe 5 minutes, maybe not even that. And as you're finished, why don't you put your name and the fact that you're done in the chat box, so we have a record of who all has attended. Some of you have full names in the participant list, and some of you were not quite sure who you are.
And as I see votes coming in, I'll go ahead and just point out that if you are watching the spreadsheet on the screen, you will see those numbers change as votes come in instantaneously. So someone just voted and it came in. So we have this little number here on the right that tells us how many people have voted. We do have some previous votes in there just to show, but you'll notice that number increases as people on the meeting right now are submitting their votes. And then the numbers here and the average will change as well.
Thank you for those of you who are putting in the chat box that you are done. Is everybody able to make it work who wants to make it work? If not, you can actually try it later too. Let's give it about another minute or two. And then we'll talk with you about how we would use this information in the meeting. I think we have enough finished at this point that we can go on. So Christina, do you want to explain it? Would you
Sure.
like to? Go ahead. You
Um,
might make it just a little bit bigger if you can. Yeah, that's good. Great.
Okay, so as you noticed, this is exactly what we would have done in an actual subject matter expert meeting, or we call them built meetings. And our employers would have voted just like you did, but through a lot more items. And as your votes came in, they instantaneously tallied here. So we have the average column, and you'll notice they're all green. But when we started, there were some reds. And we tend to average about a 2.6 and above to be green, and anything below that turns red. And that kind of highlights it as something that maybe we want to talk about with the employers. Another thing that we tend to talk about with the employers are if there's like a large gap of votes, like spread across all of them, we will often have, well, most people voted. So right here, K1, most people voted a 10, or a 4, or a 3. We had one person vote a 1. Well, why did that one person vote a 1? And we might ask them to talk. And then that causes a discussion amongst the employers. We also at this point would allow the employers to bring up any of the items that they want to talk about and discuss it. And sometimes it's interesting that one employer interpreted it one way and another interpreted the other. And by the end of it, we have a completely different statement than what we started with, based on the two different opinions and views of what it said. During a meeting, we would also have had a comment column, and as they talk, I would have taken notes in real time so that they could see any changes, any rewordings, what the new one would say, the new item would say, and that would all be here on the screen. Anne, would you like to add anything?
Yeah, one of the things I found is sometimes I'll have a group that will split entirely, half being 4s and half being 1s. And you would go, how can that possibly be? Well, I learned in one case working with a group of welding folks that in a particular locale, half the businesses were doing assembly line type welding, where the individual person just had one weld to do that was pretty straightforward. And the other half were doing fabrication work, where they had to actually have one person build something from start to finish. So it was good for the college to know that their employers were not all aligned in one way or the other. They were actually split between the level of detail that needed to be taught in the program. So it's just an incredibly rich discussion that occurs, and having these votes previously done before you start the discussion has caused the discussions to be much richer. I think we can go back to the slides now. Do we have questions? You can come off mute and you can just ask your question if you'd like, or put it in the chat box. Christina has done the work to automate how we do the voting, and we're willing to share that with you as well. Okay, so we have examined the results from a subject matter expert point of view. We looked at it, and the next thing we would do is we would have faculty cross-reference each of the KS&Ts that were prioritized high. It's unusual that everything came in over the breaking point. There are almost always some items on the list. Remember, it's a pro forma list. It's our best guess. And the employers are pretty good to correct us and tell us we didn't quite get it. So there's usually items that are prioritized low, which means they don't want them. But the ones that were prioritized high, the faculty would cross-reference them to existing curriculum and identify gaps, and also identify just those items that cover it only at the exposure level. Let's look at the next slide that is, perhaps that will make some sense. This is not the greatest of slides, but you can see, in fact, that we've now put lots of colors on it. item number K1, K3, and K9, they all ranked low. So you probably would not necessarily want to include them. But nevertheless, some faculty like to go ahead and go through all their courses and mark whether or not the course covers a particular item at an exposure level or at a thorough level. And I realize that is not really scientific, but you can talk about an intro level or a thorough level. It works very well. And many, many concepts we introduce in one course and we cover it thoroughly in another course or two in the process of getting to the credential that we're going for. But it's important also, though, you have a couple of things that are, well, actually 3 things that are in red. That means that across all the courses in the program, there's no coverage at all for that particular item. Now, it doesn't particularly matter on K3 and K9, because on K3 and K9, those scored lowly or low and probably would not be included. However, K14, knowledge of the organization's enterprise information, IT goals and objectives, they thought that was pretty important. Therefore, it would be a gap that faculty would need to figure out how to cover, either through a module, through another course, through reallocating concepts between courses or something like that. Next slide. It's always very important when you're asking employers to lead your work. It's very important that you give them feedback. We do give them color-coded spreadsheets and we discuss the gaps. We discuss the items that are only covered in exposure at an exposure level. Sometimes introductory level is fine if it's a concept. If it's a skill, maybe not so good. So we actually use the information once we've color-coded it and we take it back to the employers to discuss again. And then ultimately, if it's for a college, we would show potential curriculum with the modifications to the employers as well. It's a closed loop cycle with the business team that really puts them in a leadership role and shows that you take their input very, very seriously. Next slide. Now, other opportunities for engagement for you. Contact us to learn more about the BUILT model and how it differs from a traditional advisory board. We'll talk to you about that. We'll show you what to do with the information we have and put you in contact with other resources to help you. You can apply to be an educator subject matter expert for upcoming skill sets that are within your expertise or skill standards. What we have decided to do, we do have a skill set on cybersecurity that's going to come out pretty soon, but it's going to be just on the introductory level. That was what we were suggested that we do, so we did. But now what the thought leaders want us to do is go back through the skill standards that we already have and come up with a framework for when we need to update the skill standards based on emerging technologies in the area. So we're going to have some more meetings with our employers regarding the skill standards that are already done, and you're welcome to be involved if you are interested. You can be an employer SME if in fact you are doing that as well. You can learn more about how to use the skill standards to update your curriculum. We can work with you on that. And you can use this process. We're happy to share the process too, to create your own skill standards for another IT discipline or something else at your college. Next slide. We do have another awareness session for presidents, vice presidents, deans, faculty, and then we're going to have more professional development for faculty that gets down into the, I'll call it the weeds of how to use this to affect curriculum right now. Next slide. That's it. We appreciate you coming. There's my contact info. There's Christina's. We're very happy to help you on a continuing basis. Just contact us.